It's time for Cutting Edge Consciousness with Freeman Michaels and Barnet Bain. Thought-provoking discussions and bold ideas from the edge of possibility.
And welcome to Cutting Edge Consciousness. Freeman Michaels here.
With Barnet Bain, good moment.
Good moment. We're sticking with that, aren't we?
I'm sticking with good moment.
Oh, that's good.
I'm partial to it.
Yeah.
I think finally we found a way to address our
new
syndicated time zone
Yeah.
issues. We are all times to all people, and this pretty much
That's beautiful.
is a win-win-win-win-win wherever
to
you
all
are.
people.
So good moment all.
Good moment. So this morning, we of course go to coffee.
In the rain.
In the rain, yeah, that's big in LA.
That is quite an exotic weather experience for us over here.
And we visited CBTL.
Kibitl.
Kibitl.
I find it's a little dubious when you go to an establishment that has no vowels.
Well, they've decided to rebrand themselves.
They've gone vowels.
This, of course, is the Coffee Bean and Tea Leaf that now has decided to rebrand itself.
This is an unpaid promotion, by the way.
Everything says CBTL.
Kibitl.
And I don't like it. I'm not. I didn't nickname it. And
well, sometimes it's a bridge too far. There are some things that are not going to be hip. Sometimes, what was it about silk purses and lipsticks on pigs? Sometimes something is what it is, and you embrace it. And I love the coffee bean when it was the coffee bean.
Yeah. Now, so let me say what bothers me about this. I find marketing often annoying. I find it when it's inorganic. In other words, if it happens that people organically start nicknaming something, and that catches on, I get it. But
didn't they used to call it the bean?
The bean, that's funny.
I'm pretty sure that they already had something going there that was a little bit more, a little closer to the bone, a little closer to the bean than Cibitl. Than Cibitl.
So that's all I want to say is that I'm going to continue to call it coffee bean. That's all I've really ever called it.
You're a rebel. I like that.
I'm sticking with it.
Defiant right to the end.
And they can keep telling me we're CBTL, and I will not pay attention. It's not enough for me to say I'm not going there anymore. But do you know what I'm talking about? This whole thing of really...
It'll pass.
But this annoying marketing, this idea of... here. So the language, again, this is going to, we like to talk about ourselves versus projecting it out.
Do you remember when Radio Shack became The Shack?
Did that really occur?
Suddenly it became all hip. It was a place, let's go hang out at the Shack.
Right.
We got 10 minutes. Let's just go down there and we'll walk through some cables and wires.
Like it's a gathering place.
Yeah, exactly.
That is hysterical.
Like, we'll meet up. Where shall I meet you?
The Shack.
Yeah, the Shack. Why not?
That is funny. All right, here's what I want to say about this. Tracking back to a former conversation, which we do periodically, the clever boy syndrome, which you and I both have this thread of playing clever boy, and it's a kind of manipulative pattern, and I think
it's
that
sort of a look at me kind of pattern. We should rebrand ourselves.
Yeah,
CBs.
Well, it's a way of sort of, from my experience, objectifying, your customer, your audience, versus relating to them, and I think it's something that we're going to talk a lot about today with our guest who we bring on. How do we humanize our audience or our fans or our customers, and how do we relate to them versus try to manipulate them? I can smell it. I can smell it all over the place when a company is less than genuine and it feels like a manipulation and it's not authentic. And this CBTL isn't the...
Boy, we're not going to be welcome. We're going to
No, listen.
We're going to be getting some pretty rough reception.
They may spike our lattes from now on. No, I don't.
We may be back at Denny's.
I'm not trying to... That's right, we're back to Denny's.
At least you know who you are and where you are.
That's right. No one's pretending.
We're not going to D's.
Yeah, it's like when McDonald's became an upscale coffee house and they're doing lattes and stuff.
I like they're doing salads.
Yeah.
Now
that's
you
right.
walk in, there's pictures of
the
salad.
New healthy McDonald's.
Because we're all healthy now. It's.
There's something disingenuous about that, right?
Well, there is something to be said for how you frame it. I mean, if you frame it to say, we do this and also we're interested in being of service to those of you that have another appetite and that have other needs. But to come out and say, from last week to this week, now we're the health folks.
Right.
It's a stretch.
It's a stretch.
It's a stretch. And it just feels... The real message that is being communicated is we'll say anything, be anything, do anything for a buck.
To manipulate you.
As opposed to, we want to earn your business working with you.
That's right.
And we want to expand our service in ways that meet the needs, your changing needs. That's a different kind of message.
Oh, thank you. That was so well put.
Well, now we don't need to hear from our guest.
No, come on. He's got more than
I think I learned
more
that.
than 300 pages to say about this. 250 pages to say about this.
He's got a lot of great things to say about this. We're so grateful to have with us today Simon Mainwaring. Simon is the New York Times best-selling author of We First. He's also the founder of We First, which is a consultancy firm, a brand consulting firm that helps companies use media, particularly social media, to build communities and have positive impact. He's an award-winning or a recovering advertising executive.
That's right.
And I'm really pleased to say he is a good friend of both Freeman and mine, and I am glad to welcome you to Cutting Edge Consciousness, Simon.
Thank you so much, and I'm absolutely speechless after your dismantling of so many brands so quickly. There's nothing to be said.
Right? we didn't. Well, that's why we wanted you to just come and nod your head and say, yes, you guys got it right.
Yeah, affirm us, because we want to be clever. The real deal, anybody can dismantle.
Yes.
There's a big difference between dismantling and coming to the conversation with what you bring to it, and that has to do with, well, how do you begin to steward your brand in a way that is both responsible to the bottom line and is an offer to a community that you serve? How do you move from this idea of it's all about me to the higher octave of it's all about we?
Yeah, I mean, I think you both touched on so many important things there, one of which is, it seems like counterintuitive, but technology has actually made our sort of BS radar even higher.
Big time.
That we really know when a company's being disingenuous, and you can almost feel that sometimes there's a company that somehow falls on language that is authentic to who they are and what they're trying to do, and then other times you just know there's a bunch of marketing people sitting in a room say, we're going to make this snappy.
Exactly. This is the clever boy syndrome. This is the bunch of clever ad guys sitting around going, I know how we can trick them. We'll tell them this, and it's not something that's consistent with my experience of that brand.
And the other thing I would say is that, it's hard to fault a lot of people in the marketing world because the ground has moved underneath them in a sense that up till about sort of 5 years ago in the sort of mass adoption of social media, it was this kind of one-way channel where, television, print, or radio, you'd have these brands just talking at people and they really couldn't talk back. And therefore, we just presumed there wasn't any other alternative. And now we're also media savvy and we're also hooked into our smartphones and we're also literate through the internet that it's almost like we've stolen some of their thunder. We understand the art and the craft of marketing, in which case you can no longer just sell the image. You've got to sell authenticity instead, and some marketers are really struggling to kind of make that transition.
Well, there's a great example of this. I remember Dove came out with a beautiful viral video about body image in young girls, and they were trying to promote women loving their bodies and being healthy and not obsessed with whatever weight or all these things, and they put this out, and I remember there was some backlash because the same company evidently that owns Dove owns Axe Body Wash, which is the exact opposite. It's a total objectifying kind of. It's the opposite message. It's like if Hustler, the Flint organization, one day decided, it'd be really cool. The chastity market's really going well these days. Let's do a Christian cat.
Right.
You can't do that. You can't be both. And I think that part of what's happening, because again, the customer can talk back now, is that there's some backlash when your brand is inconsistent.
And think about, this this has become a phenomenon, this sort of consumer activism. You think about Bank Transfer Day, or the pushback against the debit card fee against Bank of America, or the online payment fee with Verizon, or the Stop Online Piracy Act, or consumers rallying on either side of the debate around Chick-fil-A and gay marriage. I mean, suddenly, as an extension of the ability to have media in their hands, in their smartphones, through social media and so on, consumers are suddenly saying, well, actually, we've got a voice, and we're not just going to talk to brands about what we think of what they're doing. We're going to talk to our peers, and we're going to use all these media channels to be heard. And so suddenly, not only do these big companies have to sort of adjust to this shifting ground underneath them, but they've got this very proactive audience that will either amplify the good things they're doing, but if they do something disingenuous or that smells rotten, they are going to go to town on them.
Well, this is such a disruptive development. It may, in fact, be you who told me the story of David Carroll, who is a singer who had an experience flying on an airline that was United, as a matter of fact, and he got to his destination, and he found that his prized Martin guitar had been destroyed by the airline, and they wouldn't take any responsibility. So he wrote a song. It went viral. There were 4 million hits in 10 days.
Wow.
And it became a catastrophic public relations event for United. And they very quickly became responsive to the new times of media interactivity. They countered with.
But you know what bothers me about this? Let me say this. I understand that companies respond to backlash, but obviously, and I know, Simon, you can speak to this, the proactive element where, everyone has had that experience of the slogan doesn't match the experience. So there's slogans, and then you call customer service, and they've got a horrible corporate culture where they're hostile towards their customers, and it doesn't match the slogan.
And because customer service is generally in a different time zone on the other side of the world.
Not to mention, recently I was on the phone with customer service to find out that it was a third party, that they weren't actually the company. They were hired by the company to serve, and it was horrible. And I was like, wow, so how do I really get my needs met? And I was on the phone for a half hour going through layer and layer of trying to get to someone who actually was working for the company who could make a decision in this case. So let's speak to that, because top to bottom, if you've got inconsistencies, incoherencies, that's a problem.
It is. And, understandably, as with any industry, there are two responses to these changes. One is an authentic reframing and changes within the company itself, and that's very difficult and painful and costly, which is why most companies don't do it. And the other response is a sort of more cynical approach, and you'll see people either do it just because some other companies do it, so they'll pretend to care about something, or they'll put a new lipstick on it or so on, but then you'll have these inconsistent experiences. But here's why the shift is so fundamental. This generation, whether it's millennials or younger, are growing up with intuitive technology like iPads and so on that just are so simple to use, and smartphones. And at the same time, they grow up in an era where, if you try and bury something deeper, Anonymous or WikiLeaks will expose it. And, if you try and do something disingenuous as a politician, we've seen through Arab Spring revolutions, this citizen activism. And if you try and do it as a brand, you see all this consumer activism. So you've not only got the technology that's empowering consumers to get more and more active, they're doing this in a whole culture with multiple levels of activism, and they know nothing else. So those of us who are a bit old and grey at the edges like I am, you've got one foot in the old world and one foot in the new. But these new generations don't know anything else. Imagine what life was like if you grew up with intuitive technology. You always had a smartphone in your hand. You never knew a time where there wasn't anything like social media, and you've got a voice to talk back to people. I mean, it's astounding. So companies are really, really struggling to get their heads around this new dynamic that's going on. And
go ahead, Barnett.
The ones that are succeeding in a sustainable way, and by that I am not referring to those that are frantically looking around in the most superficial way, bringing in very expensive advertising agencies for the most part in order to find a new story, a new message, a new look, and in 16 months they'll find the next one and the next one.
Right.
The other side of that, There are companies who have an alignment of their values and their services and their marketing and their outreach to their communities. And when those things are aligned, they're able to generate an organic story.
That's it.
And the conveyance of that organic story breeds success. It becomes a virtuous cycle. So you have companies like Patagonia that stand for something, and that in their outreach, in their brand identity, folks realize what this company is about and where they are on issues, and where they are in terms of their practices, and how they hold all of the stakeholders, not just the shareholders, how they hold them in relationship to the governance of the organization. I know that this is an important piece for you, Simon.
It is, and there are kind of three classes of companies out there. There are those that always were that way. For example, like Patagonia, that, you know, at various times, 15, 20 years ago, it made them look like they were too crunchy granola or too much of a greenie or whatever, but they were deeply, fundamentally connected to that purpose. And, you know, I went down to Patagonia last year, and you can feel it in the furniture. It's in the air. Every single person who works there knows why they work there, and they would be equally committed to the environment whether the company existed or not.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful.
The second type are these larger companies that, understandably, you know, that are generally public companies beholden to shareholders. They're driven by market forces and being accountable to the street, and, you know, and their corporate executives are rewarded on hitting analyst projections as to what the earnings will be. So really, they're driven by market forces, and only recently have those market forces started to reward purpose and storytelling. So those lazy, sleepy mission statements are being dusted off, and they're going, now what are we really doing here? And then the third type of companies are social entrepreneurs and startups, often being led by younger people who want their own future rather than their parents' past. And so they've built their company around this idea of purpose. So you've got the original sort of old guard, you've got the new upstarts, and they're both purposeful, and you've got these mid-sized to large companies that have got all the inertia that implies, trying to kind of get their heads around, A, how to re-engineer themselves, and B, how quickly can they see the bottom line returns for that shift, because they've still got to justify it because their compensation schemes are still the same. They haven't changed. While, for example, in Europe, you're starting to see some companies reward executives on the basis of reduction in carbon footprint and things like that.
Wow. So we
have some market forces here.
We have some market forces. We have to pay some bills and go to commercial. But when we come back, I want to pick up right here, because this is a really critical piece about how there are new bottom lines, as it were, that companies are espousing that are having a major impact. And we'll start with that when we get back after this break. Stay with us.
Welcome back to Cutting Edge Consciousness, thought-provoking discussions and bold ideas from the edge of possibility.
Thank you for staying tuned. It's Barnett. I'm here with Freeman and our guest Simon Mainwaring. Before the break, Freeman, you were you were getting very, very excited about something.
Well, the new bottom line. In part, this may always have been the bottom line. From my perspective, goodwill is the bottom line, because that's your sustainability factor. And goodwill literally is a line item on a balance sheet, and it means what is the value of your brand? What is the value of your reputation, of all these things? And I think there's been periods in history. In the 80s, there was a kind of me first mentality, and in the last go round of economic boom, greed is good. The famous saying from the movie Wall Street, of course. Is what Barnett's referring to. And yet, through all of that, there have been those that recognize that this goodwill is the bottom line, that there's a bigger purpose behind business than just making a buck. And that's where we were speaking, Simon. I want you to pick up right there.
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to recognize that we have to be realistic, that we can't ask companies to suddenly wave a magic wand and change everything they're doing to be positive. And even, there are companies that make eco-friendly products that still have some negative impact through what they make, or the supply chain or the manufacturing process. So we shouldn't sort of demonize everyone or make it too black and white. But that said, we do need a new bottom line. And that bottom line has been borne out by research. It's not sort of anecdotal. It's not wishful thinking. Edelman, which is the world's largest PR firm, when they do their good purpose report, they've found that consumers actually want brands to be more responsible, and they want to work with them to actually achieve that. Why? Because they went through the global economic meltdown in 2008, and so they're distrustful of brands. They've had a tough economy for a long time now. They want things to get better. So if you're going to vote for a company with your dollar in the shopping aisle, they want that company to be more socially responsible. And so when you talk about sustainability and goodwill, I think there's even a challenge to expand what we mean by sustainability. And I think we can expand it in 5 senses. The first is it needs to be economically sustainable. This boom crash cycle that we've had for so long really just keeps polarizing the wealth around the world. And eventually, even companies can't survive in societies that fail. So that's just not smart. Secondly, it needs to be ethically sustainable, in the sense that, it needs to be enforceable by the rule of law, and we see things like B corporations coming along and really starting to enforce the social responsibility of companies. Thirdly, it needs to be morally sustainable. I think it's just unconscionable that so many people are dying of preventable disease or lack of access to clean water and food around the world. And then it needs to be socially sustainable. We need to have some sort of infrastructure so societies can function. And then finally, it needs to be environmentally sustainable. So there's 2 challenges. One, companies need to be accountable for the negative externalities, their impact on the world in a traditional sense of sustainability. But they also need to expand that sense of sustainability to look at the well-being of society immediately around them, but also as a global community.
What's wonderful about this is we don't have to wait for this to be a trickle down from the very largest companies, trickling down to where it impacts us as smaller businesses and individuals. I was walking through Santa Monica about 2 weeks ago, and I noticed a little house for sale, and the realtor's sign caught my eye. It said at the bottom of the realtor sign, 10% of all profit from commission will be donated by the listing agent to a local charity of your choice. And I thought there was something. It struck me because there was something about how it was messaged that felt so deeply moving to me and authentic.
Yeah.
And it is a win-win situation. It's a win for the community. It's a win for the small businessman. And you absolutely get the sense that everything else being equal, it's this quality of community, of being in relationship to the we, that this everything else in terms of services, in terms of goods, at the level of price, we can no longer compete. We can only have an edge, I believe, based on who we are in the world and based on how we are in relationship to others in the world.
It's so true. And I mean, what a crazy idea. I mean, we're all certifiable, but imagine business in the same way that they've been pathologically committed to their own sort of self-interest and bottom line and shareholders, even to some degree, 5 to 10 to 20% were equally committed to the well-being of the society in which they operate. What scale could we...
We wouldn't recognize the planet.
It would be just a complete transformation, and I feel like that's the opportunity of this generation. Why? Because for the first time ever, they've been given a voice. And what does that voice do? It creates a dialogue, it gives them sort of a pushback, it gives them a chance to put some voice behind their voting power with their dollars, and it's going to change everything. And in the last 2 years, think about everything from Arab Spring Revolution to Occupy Wall Street, through to all this consumer activism, to the most recent presidential election and the one before. It is informing everything we do. This intersection between storytelling, social media, and smartphones. It's going to change everything.
Yeah. I think, it's interesting. For me, honesty. I've laughed about this in Barnet. You and I have talked about it. I'd like companies just to be honest. So look, our product is not good for you, but it tastes good. And, you should eat it in moderation or drink it in moderation. Do whatever you do in moderation. But please, enjoy it, because we make a really fun, I don't know. There's something about I'm tired of the manipulation. It's exhausting, and on some level, again, what we were speaking about in the very beginning, I haven't seen companies really go this route, but I'm excited about the prospect of someone doing it. Really saying honestly, this is not healthy. We know that, but it tastes good, and on occasion, indulge. It's everyone should in moderation or something like that. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, it's almost like the old VW campaign where they did that ad, and it just said ugly. It was sort of like, we're not the best looking car out there.
You're so right. Were you with that agency?
I did work with DDB Needham a million years ago in Australia, but that was done by the true architects of that ad agency. Nothing to do with me, but
it was fantastic.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
Do you remember the one that said ugly, and then they would drive it down to the ocean, and they just drive it in and say, yeah, but it floats. It's It was so brilliant because it was so authentic. It was so sincere.
Yeah.
It said, here are our strengths.
Yeah, exactly.
And this is what we're offering to you. And look at the value of our strengths. Nobody said, let's rebrand it as the new. You remember there was another company that suddenly decided they were going to call their vehicle the car. Do you remember that? I think it was Renault.
Renault?
They had a Renault 10, and then they decided to rebrand it as
Le Car.
Le Car.
Oh, that's right. That's going way back. That's like the early 80s or something.
Well, you know how we marketers would ruin it. We'd all start getting competitive. No, we're uglier. No, we.
Yeah, le plus ugly.
And it'd be meaningless after a while. It's sort of like the green space. A lot of companies just said, oh, well, listen, let's pack our products in Hessian sacks, and then everyone will think that we're green, and then suddenly claiming green was meaningless.
That's right. No more ribbon, just straw. We only have straw bows now.
What was that line? We had Zena, who we all love, Zena Musica, on, and she was talking about greenwashing. Remember that? She said there's these companies that claim to be fair trade, but they're not really. They're only using 10% fair trade, and she called it greenwashing. Remember that when she said that? That's a great statement. Just that the idea of greenwashing. And I think, go ahead.
There's greenwashing, there's cause washing, and now there's local washing because there's a lot of companies and fast food chains that claim that they use only local produce, and they don't. And so now local washing is another one. So I think it's all brainwashing of a different sort. But
where do you see it going? What do you see happening over the next 5 years? I mean, certainly one of the trends that's coming down the line has to do with, I think you alluded to it earlier, there are some of these folks that are around, particularly there's a community of them up in the north around Silicon Valley, young guys who have done extremely well, who are now looking for what they can give and have taken on various initiatives and without waiting for government or for outside agencies. They've just taken it on in ways to contribute.
Oh, I think there's two levels to what I see coming, and I agree. There's a big trend out there. Everyone from Howard Schultz of Starbucks, who's pushing back against gridlock in Washington, through to getting the people to donate to Let's Create Jobs America and so on, all the way through to these social entrepreneurs and startups. These things were unimaginable 5 or 10 years ago. So there's a whole reset going on. But in terms of the future, I think that we will see, as a function of all the things we've talked about already, greater social responsibility from the private sector. And I just wrote something about that my prediction for next year will be this whole idea of shared activism, where brands start putting their shoulder behind their core values and choosing a cause they care about and actually becoming proponents for change in that area with their customers. So they'll co-create this change. So I think that's a very positive thing. But underneath that, there's a subset of change. And we just touched on it with the green movement, that as soon as anything becomes sort of fashionable, it gets marketed and then it gets ruined. And so, the green movement kind of lost some of its value in the sense when people were cynical or they were using greenwashing. And I think purpose, by the same token, will become increasingly popular for a while, depending on how evolved the company is or how nimble it is. And then after a while, everyone will be yelling the same thing and it'll become meaningless. And then the next iteration of that might be transparency. We're more transparent than you are. And for example, you see Patagonia being the first to come out there and say, don't buy this jacket. They'd rather repair an item of clothing than sell you a new one. And they're at the bleeding edge of that. And then after that, it might be a 5-year cycle of accountability. But I think there'll be buzzwords like green and purpose and transparency and accountability, and they'll each be like 5-year cycles. But I think it's a positive trend, just getting more and more nuanced as the private sector plays a more important sort of social change role.
How do you find that? How do you find your own consultancy practice evolving to meet that trend?
You know, as with any effective branding, ideally what you want to do is own the category by defining it. And what I mean by that is, you know, I worked on the launch of all 3 generations of the Prius, Versace and Saatchi, and in the last iteration of the campaign, it was harmony between man, nature, and machine. You want to own the idea of harmony. Coca-Cola wants to own happiness with open happiness. We first wanted to, the book was a response to a speech that Bill Gates gave at the World Economic Forum, where he said the private sector should help drive social change. And so I just looked at this idea of an intimately connected and mutually dependent global community and gave that a name in an emotional way, which is we first. It's a reprioritization from me first, obviously. So where the consultancy will go will be to keep teasing out what that means. So right now, the book We First lays out a vision for a repurposed private sector. But the next thing I'm writing is about what does leadership look like in a We First world? And
That's
then I'll
right.
look at what does innovation look like?
Yeah.
So if you define your brand at a fundamental core human in a way that's like human by its very nature, it doesn't date, and that's the power of storytelling. That's where branding is truly powerful. And if you look at the marketplace out there right now, Starbucks, shared planet, IBM, smarter planet, Patagonia, don't buy this jacket, Coke, open happiness, Pepsi, refresh everything. All they're trying to do is own one fundamental human property that is timeless, and then bring that to life through ever-changing technology.
It's the humanizing factor that, for me, is the most exciting. And, you know, it speaks to what we were talking about earlier, that it's not sufficient to have a slogan that's inconsistent with your culture. The larger, imperative here is what you're speaking to, things like leadership. What does it mean? Collaboration. What does it really mean? Innovation. What does it really mean? And how are we that? Because there's so much in the corporate, sort of top-down management model that's really a manufacturing model. It sort of blossomed after World War II when this country, America, became a leading manufacturer, and top-down works really well for that. In a static environment with repetitive jobs and so forth, you can have a hierarchy. But in the new world order, as it were, the new economy, I think is what Clinton called it in the 90s, where America's never going to bounce back and be an industrial power. It's not going to happen. But in this economy, what is the premium is creativity, is innovation, and things like collaboration. I mean, we see so much technology that's collaborative technology, but the people who are using it are still in an old, sort of hierarchical competitive mindset.
We're definitely at that stage where people are bringing an old mindset to new tools. And I think one of the other big sort of shifts that are going on that will impact this trend specific to the U.S. is you see the rise of India, China, and Brazil, and I just had the good fortune to speak in Brazil at a social entrepreneurship conference, and they are on fire. They've got 3 carnivales in the next 3 years. They've got the Olympics. They've got the World Cup. They're a sustainability leader. And there's a brain drain going on in the sense that top talent that used to come to the U.S. is staying at home because this technology is now sufficiently distributed and it connects everyone that you can do just as well from, New Delhi or wherever you might be, as you could from sort of being in Silicon Valley. So the U.S. not only has its own political and economic challenges and the sort of industrial model as you talked about, in the meantime, these other nations are on the rise. So who's leading who? And what example are they setting will become another question.
So is it necessary, and my instinct to answer a question I haven't yet posed, my instinct is yes, I suspect that it is. Is it necessary to take the core human values that are addressed in the story that these companies are using to brand themselves, and to thread it down through the hierarchy, down from the C-suite through the structure of the company, so that so that everybody who is involved in the company is operating in an organic and authentic way in relationship to that story.
Big
so
time.
that they are all partisans to the story.
It's so important. There are two fundamental mistakes that I've seen throughout my consulting to big companies. And one is, for a long time, companies are on their back foot about social media or social technologies because they wanted to see if it was really going to be worth it. Now they're all in a rush to do it, and they're going straight out to the consumer marketplace, and they haven't integrated internally. They don't have authentic leadership buy-off. They get a bit of lip service. They've limited social media training and expertise to the only spotty 22-year-old in the office, or the marketing team in the corner, rather than integrating it across their entire company and then driving authenticity and transparency back through their supply chain so they can go to market with confidence and they don't get exposed. That's the first problem. The second problem is that most companies, when they then come to their marketing, they rush straight past the story to the telling. They rush straight past the core values of the brand and the thing that makes the emotional connection, and rush straight to Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and Pinterest. And they do all these tactics, and they wonder why it doesn't result in more sales or customers, and that's because they haven't made the emotional connection that is driven by effective storytelling that unlocks all the power of these tools. Because social media is not an end in itself. It's just another way, another media channel to have an emotional connection with someone that will motivate a shift in thinking or behavior.
So you can never prescribe before you diagnose.
Right.
And you have to be integrated, because at any point, if it falls apart, as we've all been speaking to, it falls apart in a big way. This is not something that people are going to take lightly. Listen, we unfortunately have come up against another moment in this show where we have to say goodbye to you, Simon, but we are thrilled, and I want to tell folks a couple things.
We're not thrilled to say goodbye.
No, we're thrilled. I didn't complete that sentence today. I was moving on to talk about your book. We're thrilled.
We're branding ourselves as a very warm and fuzzy place to have guests.
That's right. We want you to come back again and again and again.
Will you come back in studio next time?
Yeah, next time we need to get you in studio. I don't know why we didn't do that this time. The book is called We First. And I know you've got some events coming up, one in April in Los Angeles, and we want folks to know about that. What is the best website for people to go to find out what you're doing?
They should just go to wefirstblueprint.com, wefirstblueprint.com.
Okay, and we'll have that up also on the Cutting Edge Consciousness website.
Yeah, and that would give all the details about what we're doing to try and help companies really take advantage of these changes, but also to have a positive impact in the world. And that's really ultimately one of the greatest rewards we can all have.
Well, it's been a great reward and pleasure to have you with us this moment. And we're looking forward to connecting with you again here in studio on the show and personally. So thanks so much, and we will be back with Cutting Edge Consciousness after this word.
Welcome back to Cutting Edge Consciousness, thought-provoking discussions and bold ideas from the edge of possibility.
And welcome back to Cutting Edge Consciousness. Freeman Michaels here with Barnet Bain. It was so funny. I didn't mean to say that to him. We're so glad to say goodbye to you. I didn't mean that. We were so glad that he spent the time with us because, wow, what a great topic.
It's a good topic, juicy topic, timely topic, and I think we're going to be hearing more and more and more about this topic. It's already seems pretty pervasive to me. I have a radar up for this kind of discussion, but I hear it everywhere.
Well, it's interesting. So now this is what I wanted to get to, and we'll cover it now without him. With Simon was the idea of personalizing, which is what you and I always bring it back to, is seeing the inauthenticity reflected out in collective experiences is, for me, tremendous opportunity to note my own inconsistencies. We were speaking in the very beginning about the clever boy part of, my experience, where I find myself, am I being clever or am I being genuine? And it's not that neither or. It doesn't have to be an either or. I can be genuine and clever too. I mean, there's nothing wrong with being strategic and so forth. But more often than not, as a kind of adaptive pattern, as a kind of, my own manipulative patterns in the clever boy way, I want to clean that up, because for me, the imperative is be consistent in what I stand for and what I represent in my life in all areas, which is, amplified when I look out and see companies blowing it left and right, or politicians or whomever.
Well, I've heard it said over the last election cycle that companies are people too, and there's a paradox to that statement,
Of course.
obviously, but in the sense that we are all very attuned to each other's authenticity. We can recognize inauthenticity. We know when people are at ease in themselves and comfortable with themselves and aligned in their values and what they're about. We know when there's a little bit of an inconsistency about it, and we really know when it's all phony.
Yeah.
And we create distance. We don't like to be around those kinds of people who are really either trying too hard or are totally phony. And the same holds true about corporations and the messaging of corporations. We have the same radar about that sort of thing. There's a philosopher, I think it's Ines Nin. I don't even know if I'm saying his name right. I don't even know if he's a he or if he's
I think it's a woman, Ines Nin.
I don't know if he's a she. But Ines Nin, I believe, said we don't see the world as it is, we see the world as we are.
Absolutely.
And that certainly applies to corporate messaging.
Yeah.
So if a corporation begins to develop a story, a narrative, and build a brand that espouses a certain kind of values and a certain sort of social responsibility and sense of connection and community, if it's beautiful and true, we respond to it. But if those that are leading the corporation have, if they themselves are limited in their ability to experience those values, you can't be more than you are. You can't. If you're a 6-ounce glass, you're not going to hold 10 ounces.
Yeah, and I think the folks listening to this show are not going along with the program, as it were. In other words,
we have a pretty discerning audience.
That's
and they have maybe a radar that is at this point a little more tuned to what is
authentic,
both authentic and what is less than authentic,
and what is in alignment with their values. So what the language, and this isn't necessarily my language, but the whole idea of asleep versus awake, and asleep connotes that going along with the programming, going along with the story that we know isn't real. Like, we've all been in those relationships where we know it's a manipulation, but we're getting something out of it, so we stay with it, either with an individual or with some, let's say, company, or some way in which we aren't being true to ourselves. And that we refer to as the law of diminishing returns. It works in the beginning, and it gets less and less effective as we go along.
It's like my relationship to a pint of Ben & Jerry's ice cream at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Well, I'll be even more cutting than that. You and I were speaking recently about, offers that come in that don't align with our values, and the part of us that doesn't want to disappoint them, and the part of us that, says, I don't want to blow an opportunity or whatever.
And the part of us that is self-serving and says, yeah, but we could get something.
Right, that piece. That's exactly what I'm saying.
And that is.
But that's becoming less and less possible in our own personal paradigms.
Well, we're becoming, I think, more and more mature,
right,
and more experienced to know that is almost always a bad bet. There's almost always a cost to our own sense of integrity and flow and mission and purpose and vision begins to get compromised. And sometimes it's even more dramatically unpleasant than that.
Yeah. And this is what I see playing out in the larger collective is it doesn't pass the proverbial smell test. There's something about it. Something is rotten, as it were, in the state of Denmark, right? The famous Shakespeare line from Hamlet. That there's something we have a sense. We've called them uncommon senses. We're developing senses to pick up and to be aware of what is in alignment with who we are, what we stand for, what we're about. And I think that that's the growing trend, at least within our
intuitions.
community.
These are qualities of intuition. In the past, we have a long tradition of people referring to their gut instincts,
absolutely,
to the somatic intelligence, the stomach intelligence or the body intelligence, the logic, non-reasoning intelligence that is nonetheless very, very active. And we are developing greater intimacy with those intelligences, and they are reflected in our decisions and our actions in the world and in our relationships, both personal and with corporations through their brands. And it is requiring us all to be more honest about who we are and where we're coming from, and we're able to see more clearly when people are not.
And it's a developmental stage because, look, when you tell a young person that they're really not getting away with it, in other words, there's a behavior.
They think, oh, but I am.
Yeah, well, and we all come to a point where we go, wow, it took 10 years, but I realized I didn't really get away with anything. What I love in the conversation we were having with Simon, when he was talking about going to Patagonia, he said, I could feel it in the furniture. Like that line.
I got to just throw something in here.
Yeah, go ahead.
Because, folks, we're broadcasting from a studio at Gold Coast Broadcasting, not 20 minutes from the Patagonia headquarters. And from time to time, after we do this show, I go over there in order to eat in their cafeteria, which is open to the public. And this is not an ad for Patagonia, but it is, because it's so great. And the environment is so great and so beautiful. And with everything is done, the physical plant itself and the facility itself and the way it's all put together,
the
and
aesthetics.
then the food, the whole thing
The aesthetics.
is so organically beautiful.
And coherent.
And coherent and aligned every step. And you do feel good about being there. You feel good, and people are happy, and there's a big sense of community, and it's a quality experience. So if you're in the neighborhood, drop in and have lunch at Patagonia.
Yeah, no, this is a great point. So again, tracking back to where we can see this in the larger collective and own it in my own life, where there are incoherencies, inconsistencies, and you and I have spoken about this, where it's not a finger wagging thing. There's an element of compassion, because what's being expressed in the less than coherent, expressions, aspects, whatever, is human. We want to humanize, where we can hold that part of ourselves and not say, well, it's bad. It's developmental. When you're 21 years old, you make bad decisions based on wanting to get something, and as you grow, you realize, wow, you really don't get away with anything. There's this element of things come back, and when you're in your integrity meaning integrated, meaning all parts of me are held in a very gracious, constructive, and generative way, then things work out better. But the point being that orienting more and more towards authentic, more and more towards what's an expression of the person I'm becoming. We've referred to it here as having a sense of vision and holding to that vision, and that becomes a new context for all the decisions we make.
The men and women that I know, that I respect, that sounds so... Now I've really backed myself into something. The men and women that I know for whom I have the most admiration and who I consider models that I want to emulate and who inspire me, they share a particular quality of, and that is exactly what you're referring to. They're able to identify with a sense of compassion their own shortcomings and the shortcomings of others, and cut slack for that, knowing that it is developmental. And so another way of looking at it is they've gotten over themselves.
That's a beautiful expression.
And because they've gotten over themselves, by virtue of who they are, there's a certain kind of ease and openness and graciousness, and there's a safety about them that makes them effective leaders.
That's where you get to a We First paradigm, not as a marketing trick, but as someone who's gotten over themselves, the me, enough to go, wow, there's a bigger game here. Mm-hmm. There's a bigger opportunity. That's it. And that's where we start to see our interconnectedness and the effect of the choices we make, and that level of ownership changes the landscape, both sort of figuratively and from our perspective, quite literally.
Well, very literally, the landscape is about to change here because
we gotta go. we're done.
Because Coast to Coast is coming up next, and we're about to be bumped out of here.
That's true.
So we thank you for listening again. We hope that you'll join us back here next week. And in the meantime, check us out on our Facebook page, like us, and we'll see you again here next week on Cutting Edge Consciousness.
Thanks for listening.